Hi, so I'm going live on Facebook and also on Periscope, so I'm just waiting for both of those to come online. And I'm going to be with you today talking about Surviving the Holidays Part 2. Hello, Periscope. Hello, Facebook Live. My name is Severn Graham, and I am an addictions... Oh, hang on, sorry, just messed up on Periscope. There we are. Hopefully that's still broadcasting live. Hi, I am an addiction expert, and I'm going to be doing a broadcast today on Surviving the Holidays Part 2. Hopefully some of you who joined us today will have seen Part 1, which we did in November. And it was such a big topic, as it turned out, that we realized that we couldn't cover all of our bases in just one session. So we adjourned to today. And I'm very glad we did, because we've had some questions come in that people have asked. This, as I say in all of these broadcasts, isn't an anonymous forum unless you are clever and you've managed to set up an account on Facebook, or you have unless you've managed to set up an account on Facebook or on Periscope that is live, that is anonymous. So if you haven't got an anonymous account and you are going to be asking a question which relates to one of your family members or perhaps to yourself even, I strongly encourage you to email me questions rather than put them in this forum, because obviously some of the things that we're going to be talking about today are very personal. I'm aware that we will be talking about things which are sometimes traumatic or which do press buttons in the people who are watching these broadcasts. And although you may feel comfortable in the moment sharing something, you may not feel so comfortable about it later. So I strongly urge you, if you are asking something that's personal to you or to somebody near you who could be identified by this broadcast, to please email me a question. And you can email questions anonymously to Severn Graham Solutions. That's 7 like the number, Graham, Graham, solutions @gmail.com. As always, my dog Scotty is in the room with us today, and I'm hoping he's going to be a good boy. He's kind of wandering around and pacing a little bit because I put the cat outside. The cat was definitely not in a mood to be good. So if we have a little bit of disruption today, I apologize about that in advance. I quite like it in a way, though, because the reality is life is messy, and we have to deal with things in the moment. And I think that's perhaps one of the most important things that we're going to be thinking about today, is how we deal with messy reality, how we deal with an imperfect situation with the best grace possible, and with the least chaos, drama, and damage to already perhaps fragile relationships. So we are in a different place to the one that we were in last time we did this broadcast, in that we are now just a few days away from the Christmas holiday that our Christian and followers, and those who aren't Christian but who identify as wanting to be Christian for this particular holiday, that's imminent. And obviously Hanukkah is going on, and it's the solstice imminently, and the solstice is definitely having an effect if you're tuned into energy, as some people are. The solstice definitely has an effect. So there's a lot going on. There's a lot going on out there in society. There's a lot of partying going on. There's a lot of challenging things for those people who are trying to stay sober, or for those people who are using and who are in the denial that they have a problem. This is a particularly challenging season, because suddenly people around you start drinking and using drugs in a way that you would like to or do behind the scenes, and suddenly it all becomes very visible, and you may think that you can join those people and your addiction will be less visible, but the results are often not good. Okay, so a little bit of background. I am a sober person myself. I just celebrated 16 years of sobriety. I came into recovery on the 12th of the 12th, 01. And like many people who are in recovery, I didn't make it the first time. I struggled to get sober for a number of years. I began drinking and using when I was a teenager, and so understand the struggles of being a teenager and using. Hi, Jessica. Thank you for joining us. And I trained with the Priory Group in the United Kingdom to become a professional addiction expert. And I've worked for the Priory in private residential treatment environments, both primary and secondary rehab. And I've also worked in the private sector with my own company in the UK, which was called Sarah Graham Solutions before I changed my name. I won't go into that. I talked about that last time. In the capacity as a private therapist, I've worked with people from all walks of life. I deliberately set up my company to work with obviously those people who can afford private therapy, and the recognition that only a very small percentage of people can afford private therapy. So I've always made sure that I give my time to those people who can't afford private treatment as well, because I believe that this is an equal opportunities illness, that it affects all families from all backgrounds. Some people think that it must be easier if you can afford private treatment and private resources, and in some senses it is, but there are also other challenges that come with that. I am working on these broadcasts with Letting the Light In blog, which is a fantastic free resource for families that has been put together by a family member whose child has been affected by addiction. And this family have really spent a lot of time and put a lot of effort into learning about the disease of addiction and how to get the best treatment for their child. And in so doing, they've also really had a good look at their selves as individuals and as a family structure, and what changes need to happen within the family for their own personal healing, and also for the sake of the family going forward to break the chains of addiction. Now, for those of you joining us who don't know much about addiction, I'm now building up a backlog of films on this subject that you can use as a resource. They're on my YouTube channel, and Letting the Light In are posting them too. You can find links to them via my Facebook page as well, 7 Graham Solutions, and via Letting the Light In. They will signpost you to the vlogs that we've already done on this subject. So every time that we do one, I assume that we've got some people joining us who've never seen one of these broadcasts before, and we've got other people who have had a chance to look back on the archive now. So for those of you who've seen me talking before, I'm sorry that there will be some repetition. I hope I say things in a new way that might resonate and teach you something else. And for those of you joining us for the first time, I'm sorry if I use shorthand sometimes to talk about things. And if I do say anything you don't know, do ask us a question live. I will try and respond to questions live. I'm going to write them down. And I will also incorporate what you're asking in future broadcasts. And you can also email me directly. You don't have to just email me to ask a question. You can actually email me directly if I say anything, any point today that you don't understand, that doesn't make sense. Okay, big breath, and I'm going to have a sip of water. Now, I like to be completely transparent. I believe that in terms of working in this field and in terms of being credible with people that I work with, it's always important for me to stay very real and to not pretend. And I will say to you today that I've been having quite a challenging time in my own recovery and my own personal life around my health and a few other things lately. So I'm not feeling 100% on my game. I'm going to do my best today, but I can only do my best, and if I'm a little bit all over the place, I apologize about that, although I am, that is a bit my nature, to be a little bit all over the place. But anyway, I'm going to dive straight in with one of the themes today. This broadcast is going to try and address more the thoughts and perspectives of families than just the addict. I know that in part 1 of Surviving the Holiday Season, I did very much get into trying to help people understand what it's like to be an addict, to have a substance use or other kind of addiction at this time of year. And I'm aware that I probably didn't really say that much for families last time. Now, one of the first things to say that I think is very important is that there is no one answer to this. I can't sit down. I wish I could give you a flow chart or just write a couple of pages of A4 that would give you the answers to this situation, how to navigate this holiday season and protect the family member who's struggling with the addiction, or family members as it sometimes is, how to support a person who's in recovery in a perfect way, how to protect yourselves and look after yourselves in a perfect way, But unfortunately, there is no one path. There is no kind of bullet point list that's going to give you these answers. And the reason why that isn't the case is because addiction is a very, very complex illness. There are many components to addiction, and it also manifests in a unique way, both in the individual and in each family. Each family has its complete own spin on how the addiction manifests. Now, to give you an example of this, actually, do I want to give you that example? Perhaps not, actually. But what I will say is that, for example, in my family, I'm half Scottish, and there was a lot of alcoholism in the Scottish side of my family. And then addiction changed shape through the generations. So my grandfather, for example, who'd seen his father be very poorly with alcohol and had lived through the effects of having an alcoholic father, very much took the pledge that he wasn't going to be an alcoholic himself. And how that transpired in him was that he became what we call a dry drunk. He was one of the angriest, most bitter, hostile, fearful people I've ever met, incredibly anxious, because he had the disease of addiction. He had the kind of brain that people with addiction often have in terms of anxiety, a tendency towards depression, a tendency towards compulsivity, low self-worth, big ego. These are the kind of personality traits that are common with people with this illness. He had all of that going on, but he didn't have any kind of a program of recovery. He didn't have any kind of support structure. And so he kind of had a very small world, sat in his armchair, shouting at the television and not being very pleasant to be around, and which was very unfortunate for him and very unfortunate for his family, because I, as a child, never got to really know him because there was this wall around him protecting him, keeping people at bay. I'm telling you this because it's important, I think, when you come into this situation, if you're new to this situation and kind of you're just starting to think, oh my goodness, maybe we've got an addiction problem in our family, what I would say to you is one thing you can do at this time of year is, and I think this is very important going into the new year, is to really step back for a moment. I know that it's probably not exactly the right time to step back, 'cause you're probably all out there buying presents and going to parties and stuff, but when you can get some quiet time, really sit back and have a look at your family and have a think, if you have got addiction in the family, how it has changed shapes through the generations. What are the kind of generational chains of addiction, if you have them? How has it manifested? And maybe it's a good opportunity to start really educating yourself about how addiction operates. I've mentioned this before, and I just will show this to you guys because I think it is such a fantastic thing to just start understanding what we're dealing with here. This is the addiction tree, which you can find very easily by Googling it, the addiction tree. And what it does very clearly is show all of the different branches, all of the different ways that addiction can manifest, all of the different symptoms of the illness. And it also shows the underlying roots that create this. And those underlying roots are the underlying damage of shame, wounding, and division within the individual. So that's a really good starting place to start educating yourself about this. Where am I going to go to next? Yes, I think that also is important because you may be aware that somebody in your family has a problem with a particular substance, for example. You may be aware that somebody has an alcohol problem. You may be aware that somebody has a cannabis use problem. You may be aware that somebody has an addiction to the internet or to computer games, or that, as is increasingly the case, unfortunately, we're seeing people who are very addicted to pornography online or to gambling online. So you may recognize there is one thing going on. But it's very important for you to know all of the other ways that addiction can show itself, or the different ways that people can act out on an addiction, because unless the person tackles all of them, they're not going to get into recovery. And all of those different symptoms are all ways of trying to fix and push away and mask the pain that is driving the addiction. When I talk about pain, sometimes I mean physical pain, but usually I'm talking about emotional pain. Okay. I am going to have a quick look at which one of these subjects should we look at first. Okay, one question that came was around teenagers and heavy use, and how worried parents should be when they start to see that there is heavy use going on by a teenager. First of all, I think we need to break that question down into heavy use of what, because traditionally what you might have seen happening at this period would be a teenager getting very drunk with their friends. There's a lot of kind of minimization of the seriousness of that, especially in the United Kingdom, where I'm from. We have a very out of control drink culture, which really hides from itself and denies from itself the serious consequences of especially teenage use. In the United States, where I'm sat today, in Los Angeles, and across America, they have a much different approach to teenage binge drinking, or to teenage drinking in general. They have an age of consent that's 21, and that is seen as very old to people in Britain and very kind of nanny state in a way. But actually, there are very good reasons why they have that policy, of no drinking till 21, and seeing teenage drinking as much more serious than we do in the UK, is because they have really had a look at the evidence base around the impact of drinking on the teenage brain. The human brain is actually still growing and developing until well into the 20s, but going through absolutely key, crucial stages of development in the teen years. That's where you really see the big changes in terms of a child becoming an adult. And teenage binge drinking can have a really negative impact on brain development. And I sit here as somebody who knows that firsthand. I started drinking at 12 years old, and I have some brain damage from my teenage binge drinking. You know, I'm in the lucky position that I've been able to have some of the best tools, have access to some of the best tools. And for example, I have my brain mapped by neuroengineering, and actually saw in visual depictions the areas of damage to the memory centers in my brain. So, you know, we view alcohol as perhaps not so serious. Many families, especially when they're facing other addictions, you know, especially addictions that are not so societally endorsed or celebrated, shall we say, we often can overlook alcohol. And I say strongly to people at this time of year, do not miss the elephant in the room when it comes to addiction. Do not think that a teenager misusing alcohol or drinking alcohol heavily is not really a problem compared to the other things that they could be doing, because there are very serious consequences to teenage binge drinking. And of course, many of the reasons why people end up in ER departments, A&E departments, as they are in the UK, over this holiday season are because of drink. You know, drink, again, because drink has been so much part of human culture for so long, and because we are so used to the physical symptoms of being drunk, and you know, it's celebrated in our culture in so many ways, we don't actually think about just how serious those symptoms are, really. You know, if somebody falls over and breaks their leg because they're drunk, that is not often seen as such a serious thing as if somebody had, if you heard that somebody was on heroin and had fallen over and broken their leg, you might have a different emotional response to it. Or certainly, you know, somebody using a different drug to alcohol and having a negative consequence, we kind of often see it more clearly for what it is. But with alcohol, there's this kind of fog around it, this kind of, because we're so in it, as it were. It's so much part of our history, and we've all been there and done it largely, that people don't see it clearly for what it is. Certainly in terms of the cost to societal health budgets, alcohol is way ahead of the game in terms of the health costs from substances. You know, when we talk about addiction, the major number one health cost to society is actually food, the consequences of obesity, which is very tied in with another addiction, which is food addiction. perhaps I will touch on that for a moment as well, because quite often people will think about the dangers of somebody coming home who is trying to stay sober or trying to stay off their drug of choice, for example. Maybe you've got a young person who's been through some kind of a program and they're coming home, and you might already have some awareness of the kind of things you need to think about in terms of keeping them safe or providing a safe environment for them around the drugs and the alcohol. But food is something that is really overlooked at this time of year. And again, because this is the season of indulging, isn't it? This is the season where all of those usual kind of rules and ways of being in the world go out the window. And that's partly why people love this season, because they do get to eat, the cakes and the biscuits, cookies, and, overeat, and all of that stuff is very much part of the celebrating. But if part of your addiction profile is an eating disorder, actually coming home into an environment which has a lot of the foods which are your trigger foods can be so challenging. It's very important that we think about addiction when we think about addiction, because that can be the one that is very hidden. A lot of eating disorders are very hidden. Hi Speedy Bug, welcome on Periscope. A lot of eating disorders are very hidden, and you may have a young person, and we usually think that it's women, but I have to say increasingly food addictions, both in terms of overeating, purging, and restricting, anorexia, are increasingly affecting all genders, not just women. So we need to also think about that in terms of young men. The pressure, the societal pressure for the perfect body has definitely escalated dramatically in the last 10 years, and young men are feeling the effects of that and are really worried about their bodies and how they look and whether they have that six-pack. And so eating disorders are much more common amongst young men, but very undiagnosed. I've worked with young men, and they will be honest about their cannabis addiction with me, and we can start doing good work around that. But they are very reluctant to talk about the relationship between their cannabis use and their eating disorder or their body dysmorphia. So that's just something to think about. Okay. There don't seem to be any questions coming in directly from you guys. I hope I'm saying something that's interesting to you. I'm going to keep plowing on until I get some more live questions from you. I ordinarily, I do these sessions for about 50 minutes, a counseling hour as it's called. I would do my best to make it to 50 minutes. I'm not feeling 100% today though, so if I run out of steam before then, I may have to finish early, but I'll do my best to keep going. Okay. There are two families watching this. I kind of may find themselves in one of two camps. Either they have got a young person who is trying to stay sober, and so you've got the kind of issues around sobriety and supporting early recovery. So that's one camp. Or the other camp that may be joining us today are those people who have somebody who's actively using, and there's kind of the early awareness in the family that using is not healthy, and that there is a sense of a loss of control, and a sense that the young person or even older person, I don't want to just say that we're addressing young people. Okay, I'll address that in a second, Jessica. Good point. Going to talk about thriving in this season, not just surviving. Yes, so there's a growing awareness in the family that there's a problem. The first thing I think that it's really important to do as a family is start communicating. You know, if a member of the family has started to notice things and is starting to have suspicions or fears that somebody in the family has a problem, it's really important to not just keep that information to yourself. One of the things that tends to happen in families as addictions grow is that dishonesty and keeping secrets starts to happen. And when somebody has an addiction, a huge part of how addiction operates is something called the denial process. And this is a process that creeps in and becomes stronger and stronger and stronger as the addiction progresses. The denial process is a way that the person who's starting to develop a problem or who has a problem hides it from themselves, because they unconsciously so want to carry on using or doing the thing which is harming them, that they need to tuck away, push away the reality of the negative consequences that they are starting to experience, or the things that they're doing to other people that they feel bad about, or the ways that they're getting themselves into trouble, or the ways that their schooling starting to fail, or the fact that they've had a letter from their boss saying that they're on final warning. Those kind of consequences start to mount as the addiction progresses, and they can really escalate dramatically at this time of year. And so the person starts to deny that to themselves and also to other people. And at that point, the person who has the problem may start asking family members who've seen different bits of the picture to start keeping secrets for them. And one thing that can really happen around this is you can start to get kind of generational secrets being kept, you know. So the parents' generation might know some stuff. The parents, the aunts and the uncles, they may start to have an awareness that something is wrong. And then that generation may decide that they don't want to tell the older members of the family because they don't want to worry them. You know, that's a classic line, isn't it? Oh, let's not worry Granny, or let's not worry Grandpa, you know, his health's not good, we don't want to upset him. That kind of thinking starts to creep in. Now, obviously, you don't tell somebody who's got you know, somebody who's very old and in a nursing home and who's got a heart condition that you're worried that your son or your daughter or whoever is in real danger, if it's going to compromise their safety, unless that person is the person who's paying for the young person's drug use. Then maybe you do have to tell them. Thank you. Yes, I will come to that question on contracts. That's a very good question. So one thing that's very important going into this season is honesty. And maybe before we start, sorry about the noise, and I'm aware this chair's creaking today. I have to do something about that, get the WD-40 out. One thing that's very important going into the season is that you have some honest conversations and do some information sharing, and start to make agreements with other family members about how you're going to handle this situation. You know, it's really important that you start taking the power back from the person who is causing the problem, or the person who is in pain and is struggling, to put it in a different way. It's very important you stop letting that person be in charge, because this is one thing that addicts are very, very skilled at, is leveraging their situation to get everybody else on a back foot and stop any action being taken that's going to harbor their addiction. That's going to hinder rather their addiction. One thing that's very important to think about is supply of money. And this is something that's very important to think about at this time of year, because maybe you need to think about in terms of present giving, for example. Maybe if you decide that you want to give your family member a present, that is not a good idea to give them money if that's what they're asking for, because maybe that money will be spent straight with a cannabis dealer or straight down the off license. Is, you know, money is often a real trigger for people who have a substance use issue. So far better to give something that is a tangible thing, that isn't something that can be pawned really easily as well. And that something may actually help them, you know, something that maybe can help with stress relief or help support their physical well-being or their emotional well-being. I can't tell you what that thing will be, but that's something to think about. Yes, letting the light in just reminded me about contracts. It might be worth, when you're thinking about whether you're having this person come visit you over this holiday season, to think about whether you need to have some kind of a contract with them in terms of say they're coming for the day. What is an acceptable thing for that person to do on the day, and what are the things that are not acceptable? you know, how you can welcome them into the family and how you can support them. And I think this contract, it's nice to have it as something that you negotiate and see as a positive exercise in supporting the person, not just in saying, you know, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, but something that's actually going to be a positive support. I would also tie in, I got another question come through around drug testing. Drug testing is a very controversial area. I'm just going to share my personal experience of it. I worked on a day program in the National Health Service, a National Health Service day program. And we had very strict drug testing on that program because it was a day program. So people were coming in for the day to do the work with us and then going out into the community. We had a very strict drug and alcohol testing policy. And some people kind of view that negatively in terms of human rights and saying it's taking away the decision-making power of the individual, or kind of not respecting their honesty, et cetera, et cetera. What I would say to you is that because of that denial process, and because of the manipulation that goes with addiction, and because of the fact that people, when they're using, think that they can get away with things, actually drug and alcohol testing can create a real sense of safety for the person coming into what's a risky situation. It can actually provide a sense of result, a kind of something that supports the resolve. If there's a very real chance that they will get caught out if they drink or use in the environment, that can actually be very supportive. So I would think about that. If you've got somebody who's in early recovery, who's been struggling, there's been a history of lapses or relapses, if there's been a lot of denial of the truth of their illness and you feel like you can't 100% trust that person yet, I would build drug testing or alcohol testing into the contract that you have with that person, so that it's accepted that if there's any suspicion by any family member that the young person or the older person, but the person has drunk or used, that you can test. Drug tests they're not cheap, but they're also not massively expensive. So, you know, I would advise getting some drug tests and having them in the cupboard, or even investing in some alcohol testing equipment. I think that's a very good thing. I hope I've covered that. Okay, the question about thriving. Absolutely. I mean, I think it's important that we think about this as a positive opportunity to thrive as a family. Certainly somebody who's in early recovery, although this is a challenging time of year, this is also an opportunity to really celebrate and enjoy being in recovery. You know, being active in your addiction is not a fun place. Feeling like you're not in control of your own life, feeling like you have to keep sneaking off to use, feeling like you've got all of these secrets that other people who love you don't know about, that is very stressful and very pressuring. And one of the things which is so lovely to see when somebody gets into recovery in the early stages often is that you start seeing people laughing, often a lot, you know, really connecting with a genuine laughter and a genuine reconnection with enjoying life. And so it is important to build in thriving. It is important to think about how can we as a family have a new celebration. There are some very contentious questions that have come in around, for example, a classic one is, okay, we've got somebody who's just been to rehab and they're coming back to the family for Christmas Day or for a family gathering, maybe for New Year's Eve. Should everybody not drink, for example, if you've got somebody who's got an alcohol problem? I can't give you a definitive answer about this. I very much believe that the reality is that we live in a world where there is a lot of drink, there is a lot of drugs out there. As a person in recovery, we are learning to, there's a phrase in the big book of AA, which I really love, which is recovery is a bridge to normal living. And that's very true. You know, we can't live in this tiny, isolated world, keep cutting ourselves off from everybody else, where there is no threat to our recovery in terms of, you know, being around drink, being around drugs. You know, ultimately we have to be able to move through the world and attend social functions, go to people's weddings, go to funerals, all these places where people are drinking or where people are eating the foods that we've really struggled with, or you know, Los Angeles, I'm very much confronted every day with having to move along. I live just off Melrose Avenue, and Melrose Avenue is awash with cannabis dispensaries, medical marijuana cannabis dispensaries, and wherever you move through Los Angeles, you smell cannabis on a daily basis. You know, cannabis was the first illegal drug I picked up. So I have to be able to move through the world and tolerate being around people smoking cannabis. Now, I choose not to put myself in environments where, like, I wouldn't have somebody in my house smoking cannabis, for example. I wouldn't risk a contact high, as it's called, is where you get high off of secondhand smoke. I personally would not risk that. I still do not feel comfortable even inhaling smoke that I can see. Obviously, I can't control if I cycle down a road and smell cannabis, and that's not going to make me high. But you know, it's not a perfect solution, but we have to be able to move through the world. However, I would say to you that if, as a family, alcohol isn't a big deal to you, if you've got somebody who's just literally fresh out of rehab, or who's really had a number of relapses and has really struggled to maintain sobriety, the reality, as I said in the last broadcast, is that being around alcohol is very challenging, or being around people using your drug of choice or eating your binge foods of choice is very, very challenging. And on the one hand, it's something we have to learn, as I just said, and we have to build up the resilience to be able to cope with that. But it may be, and you as a family need to make a judgment call around this, and you need to have an honest conversation with the addict. It may be that it's just too early at this particular moment for them to be around that behavior or those substances. And then you need to make a decision as a family. Okay, are we as a family willing to not drink ourselves over this evening? You know, to put away wine, put away the beer, put away the champagne, whatever it is, and have a sober evening ourselves. And of course, there is an argument that it's quite interesting if your family isn't a family that has a lot of alcoholism, but does, you know, always use alcohol as a social lubricant. Then maybe that is an interesting experiment for you to see if you can get through an evening of a family celebration without alcohol. You know, perhaps that is an interesting experiment that everybody could do. I bumped into somebody the other day who was telling me that he's just done 2 weeks sober through this period, because he wanted to see what it would be like. He doesn't feel like he's got an alcohol problem. He's in an environment, he's a rock musician, he's in an environment where there are lots of people drinking and using around him very heavily, and he wanted to step back from it from a couple of weeks and see what it would be like to be sober. And he got through that 2 weeks, but that experience of being sober for those 2 weeks gave him a very new take on what it's like to not drink. Even if you don't particularly have a problem, to just actually be sober and try and enjoy yourself. Now, I, as a sober person who I can sit here for 16 years of sobriety, and I've been clubbing in Ibiza, or Ibiza, as the Americans say. I've been clubbing, all night clubbing, some of the best clubs in Ibiza. I've been to Glastonbury Festival sober and had an amazing time. I've been to all sorts of environments where other people are drinking and using, and I've had good reasons to go to those places. I've had DJs that I love that I've gone to see, or I've gone to be with a band, or I've gone to support somebody, or just to have a good time with other sober friends. And it is possible to do all of these things sober. You know, it really is. You know, go to a football match. Football's not my thing, but I know that for some people who are real sports fans, when they put down beer, for example, going out and having a night out and going to seeing their favorite team, that initially can be very challenging, to not have the beer with the guys, or to sit at home watching it, you know, with your friends, and for everybody around you to be drinking and you would have been drinking too. That can be very, very tough in the early stages, but we can find a way to do it. And how we do it, I would say, is that we have to have a support structure. And again, this is where families can be very, very important. It's really vital that there are open lines of communication, and that the person who is struggling with addiction has safe people that they can turn to. I can have a sip of water. I'm starting to get a slightly sore throat. Another family that I've got another friend who is in the early stages of recovery, and his family is a family that is a very high risk family. There is drinking and there is also using going on across the generations in his family, and he's going home to them for Christmas. And he has had a very open and honest conversation with his mother about this, and obviously his family know that his addiction is so severe that he could die if he relapses again. And so they have, I don't know if it's a contract as such, but they have agreed places within the house which are going to be completely alcohol and drug free. And he is allowed to go to those places whenever he wants. He can even, it's been agreed that he can even leave the family table at a meal if he's struggling with people around him drinking, and he can go to these spaces. And he's got things like, he's going to have a computer game console set up in one room, that he can obviously go and make a telephone call to his recovery friends. He's asked if he can take a couple of recovery friends home with him to this family meal, and that's being supported and encouraged. It's really, really important when you have somebody who is in recovery to recognize that one of the biggest challenges, I think, for people in recovery, and especially for young people who are so affected by peer pressure, is that one of the challenges of being sober, especially if you're the only sober person in your peer group, is not fitting in. Ironically, people who develop drug and alcohol problems often from a very young age feel like they don't fit in anyway. They feel outside of the group. They feel like they haven't got the same rule book to life as other people. And so that was how they felt before the drink and the drugs became a problem. The drink and the drugs became a solution to that problem, in that when people drink and when people take drugs, you suddenly can feel part of, you can move in the social world and feel much more at home. So now you've kind of burnt your bridges and that's stopped working. So you have to find a new way of being. And now you're back in that position of social isolation, where you are the person who's not doing that thing again. And that's why when we talk about having fellowship and community, that's why that is so important. And that's why I, as an addiction expert, am such a big fan of the 12-step meetings and the other recovery fellowships that are out there, like Smart Recovery, because I think, aside from what they offer in terms of a set of 12 steps, which are a set of psychological tools for kind of processing your addiction and learning who you are and learning how to be in the world without drinking drugs. Aside from all of that, I think what the most important thing about fellowship meetings is exactly that. They are fellowship. And it's very important, if you have a family member who is trying to be clean and sober in this holiday season, to think about the fact that that person may feel very on the periphery of things because they're the one who's not having a glass of wine with the family meal. They're the one who isn't able to eat the sugar, for example. I mean, sugar addiction is such a challenging one, and I really do feel for those people who have to go through this holiday season without sugar, because sugar is in so many of the kind of foods that we associate with the festive seasons and with this holiday season. The cakes, the pastries, the puddings, the drinks. Sugar is such a prevalent substance. It is the white powder above all other white powders, which causes the most health problems and causes the biggest addiction problems in terms of scale. And so that person may feel very different because they can't enjoy those same foods. And it's really important to think about having special things for that person as well. Maybe making the effort to have a sugar-free cake, or if they can't have white flour as well, having some special food, having some recognition that they deserve something special too. And that other people might take part in that as well and enjoy that with them, so that they're not on their own as the one kind of freak on the edge of the party who's eating, I don't know what it would be, but something that's not as enjoyable and not as fun and not a special thing. Okay, I'm just going to have a quick look at my post-its of the questions that came in and see if there's a big one to cover in the last 7 minutes. Okay, I think this is an important one. What to do if someone starts using during this season and they are somebody who's in recovery. I think this is a real risky time. That's the reality. this is a real risky time. Sorry, I was just reading a question that's coming in. This is a real risky time, and unfortunately some people are going to have lapses over this holiday season. Not everybody is going to get through this season without having a lapse or a relapse, and some people are going to die. And that's why I've got that sweatshirt, that hoodie over there, Come Over When You're Sober, which is a hoodie by Little Peep, who is a very talented young musician who just recently died from an overdose. And I've got that as a sobering reminder to myself, that this illness is a killer illness. This is no joke. Lots of people are going to have lapses and relapses over this holiday season, and some of those people are not going to make it back into recovery, unfortunately. This illness does kill a lot of the people who have it, left untreated, and that is why it's so important that we don't mess about with this illness, that we don't get complacent, and that we do everything we can to support people in recovery, because addiction also is a progressive illness. So you may, and this is one thing which often people have to really face in families, is especially younger people, you know, a younger person coming into a family situation. Older people who have their own issues sometimes denigrate and make fun of the younger person for taking their addiction seriously and getting help and treatment and trying to stay sober. You know, I was talking to some people the other day, and they were talking about the enormous peer pressure to drink and take drugs that they're facing at the moment. And if you don't have an addiction, you know, having that one or two drinks or getting drunk for one night, it's not that big a deal. Maybe, you know, maybe the worst consequence you're going to face is a headache the next day, or sleeping with somebody at the holiday party that you really wish you didn't sleep with. Maybe that will be the worst consequence you face. But for somebody who has this illness, the illness of addiction, when you get into recovery and you have some sobriety under your belt, you've picked up maybe your 30-day keyring in a meeting, or your 60-day keyring, and you're coming into this season, you don't know where that next relapse is going to take you. Unfortunately, there's a saying which is so true, which is every day you are in recovery, your addiction is in the back room doing press-ups. And that's so true. People, when they relapse, usually within a very short period of time, go back to the exact place they were at before. They don't even get much of a grace period in terms of, you know, a few weeks where it's okay. Usually they go back exactly to that place they were at when they chose to get into recovery, and that's usually not a good place. That's usually not a fun place. But then if you've been in recovery a while, with that statement being true, your addiction is in the back room doing press-ups, you often will then go down to an even worse place. Thank you. Yes, I will acknowledge that. Letting the light in. So if you have somebody who starts using in your family over this holiday season, it's really important to try and support that person back into recovery. And that might well mean that you have to practice some tough love. It might well mean that you have to have a family scene, and that addict's behavior does become visible, and that granny's going to find out about this, because you actually have to ask that person to leave the family, and maybe go back to their addiction treatment if they've come out of addiction treatment, or go back into their whatever their housing situation is, or maybe you have to even at times put somebody out on the streets. And you know, this is so difficult for families, especially at this time of year, the idea of making somebody homeless. But it's really, really important not to enable the addiction, and not to drop your sense of seriousness just because it's the holiday season. Don't think, oh, I'm going to give them a free pass because it's the holiday season, I can't turn them out at this time of year, that's not fair. If a person is to get back into a place of realizing the seriousness of their situation, and to not go back into the denial that they can make it work this time, consequences have to be enacted quickly and firmly. One of the reasons why I've been good at this job is because I've been a big proponent of tough love, and I've shared in other blogs, I'm sure, some of the examples of tough love that I've had to do you know, throughout my own personal recovery and also as an addiction therapist. And sometimes that tough love exacts a huge toll on the person who's doing it. It's very painful. I actually had somebody arrested in my house who had drunk driven to my house and was intending to drunk drive again on the M25, which is like a huge freeway in England, and they were intending to get in their car and go off and score heroin drunk, driving on the freeway again, on the motorway again. I actually had to have that person arrested to stop them driving and going and scoring, for their own safety and for the good of society. That person was, as you can imagine, furious with me, and started a war of kind of hatred against me, which went on for 18 months. Their ex-husband, because this person lost their license, I was the witness in the court case, they lost their license. They had children who they couldn't drive to school anymore. They caused untold kind of well, they kind of badmouthed me to a lot of people in the recovery meetings that I went to, who also turned on me, thinking that I'd been really heartless. How could I have this person arrested, etc., etc. So tough love can sometimes be horrible, and I can't tell you how heartbreaking it was to see that person who it was a really close friend of mine arrested in handcuffs, taken away by the police. But I knew that that was the right thing to do in that moment for their safety and for society's safety. Anyway, we're at time, but the ending of this story is that sometime later, over a year later, I bumped into this person at a funeral of a mutual friend of ours, somebody who died in recovery, who was an old gentleman, a lovely old gentleman. That person rushed up to me, and I was really worried that they were going to hit me. It's the first time I'd seen them face to face since the court case. And that person threw her arms around me and thanked me for sticking to my guns and going to court and getting their license taken off them, because, as she said to me, you are the only person that I haven't been able to manipulate and get my way with. And that was my wake-up call. Losing my license was my wake-up call that I am an out-of-control alcoholic and addict, and that I need to take this seriously. So that has helped me so often in my work with family members and in my recovery, in my relationship with my friends. Sometimes we are asked to do really, really difficult things in terms of tough love to support the recovery of another person. But we are dealing with a killer illness. Many young people are losing their lives at the moment to the prescription medication epidemic that's killing so many people in America. Europe cannot be complacent about this. At the moment, people are being complacent about it, but they shouldn't be with the internet. I know that's a bit of a depressing note to end on, and I'm sorry. But the good news is that recovery does work, and that people can recover. And no matter how far down the scale they've gone, they can recover. They can have a fantastic time this holiday season. You can have a fantastic time celebrating recovery with your loved one this holiday season. Please go back and watch Surviving the Holiday Season Part 1. Please thrive this holiday season. I really hope this has been some benefit to everybody watching. I wish you all personally a very happy holiday, and I will see you all in the new year. And please do go to lettingthelightin.com to get extra support as family members. Also, family members, there's a great charity called DrugFam, drugfam.com. They are a wonderful resource of support for families in the UK. There are some good support structures across the world. We have the wonderful tool of Google to help us find these people. And I would say to you that recovery works, and it really is worth it. And please keep the faith that it may be dark days now, it may be very challenging now, but we can all have a better, healthier, happier 2018. And I will see you all in 2018. Take care. Thank you.